Kia ora and welcome to Kiwi Corner at ANZSOG 2011. Today I'm going to discuss how we in Land Information New Zealand started with a major issue with our stakeholders and customers back in 2004 and turned that around to where we're now seen as best practice exemplars in the area of government regulation in New Zealand through the involvement and participation of those same stakeholders and customers. I'll begin with some context about LINZ, where we were in 2004, what we did about it, how we involved those customers and stakeholders, and finally some lessons learned. So LINZ manages 8% of New Zealand's land, including the South Island High Country, some of the most spectacular scenery in the world. We have a government mandate to manage information about land, to manage transactions concerning land, and manage land itself on behalf of the Crown. So that land management mandate starts with our regulatory functions that underpin the economy. To enable trade and commerce, people need to know what their property rights are and those of others. That's our land title function. They need to know where property boundaries are, which is our surveying function. And they also need to know what their properties are worth, our valuation function. And in some cases, they need to know how public land is put to its best use, or what happens if the Crown needs to acquire private land for public work. It's our Crown land function. This was the problem in 2004. LINZ was facing some intense criticism that its regulations were inconsistent and not fit for purpose. What happened was we used to write our rules, standards and guidelines in the back room, and then we'd put them out telling people to comply with them. So the people who needed to interact with us were very frustrated. They didn't know what they needed to do to comply, and they wanted us to get out of their way so they could perform their roles with a clear sense of direction. We didn't have expert knowledge of the practitioners captured in our process. So our starting point was to form a new regulatory group, split from the operations side of the business in 2004. And one of our first steps to do was take a stock take of all our regulatory documentation. And we found we had over 300 different documents for our practitioners to use, all different types: standards, guidelines, specifications, fact sheets, rules, guidance notes, and a lot of operational material in there. And there was no common approach or philosophy as to how we regulated, and the regulators each operated in complete isolation from each other. We never talked to the regulated community about what they knew and how things actually happened at the coalface. So we knew we needed to move to performance-based regulation and talk and engage with the regulated community and strip out that operational material. We decided on an approach called optimal regulation: as little as possible, as much as necessary. And you'll be familiar with other taglines around the track, such as light-handed regulation or less red tape. We certainly knew that we needed a very different set of traffic lights for our customers. It's our strategic context diagram. At the top is what government requires from us through its legislation and cabinet directives. At the bottom is how we used to operate. We went straight from our legislation, cabinet directives, and started writing our standards, guidelines, rulings, and then auditing onto it. And what we found was there was a big gap in the middle. We call it the strategic context, and it's where the regulators need to step in and develop their outcomes and objectives. And once you've got that middle part filled in, it's much easier to move back from the top to the bottom and back and forth again. So with that in place, that linkage is much clearer. And this was one of our first major building blocks, much more clearer about our outcomes. Our next step was to establish a dedicated regulatory standards team who would own the frameworks and processes. This team manages a risk framework to determine if the regulator needs to intervene or not. As well as developing and maintaining a toolkit for the regulators, the team act as project managers to end-to-end developing new interventions. They provide expert advice on drafting technical content, and they remain somewhat neutral from the regulator to challenge their thinking and logic. We also use the Standards New Zealand and International Standards Organisation approach to developing standards by using expert committee and public consultation processes, which I'll talk about soon. And this team also ensures a consistent look and feel to published documents, so they look the same to our regulated community. The regulator itself, LINZ has 4 regulators, including the Registrar General of Land and the Surveyor General, and they're responsible for providing the technical expertise from their regulatory area. The regulator will review the existing regulatory documents and decide what level of regulation is needed. So if there's a high risk, they'll choose something like a rule or a standard where they'll mandate this must be done. And if there's a lower risk, then they'll use some guidelines for best practice. The regulator retains overall responsibility for the content, and they approve the final regulatory document. So alongside that deliberate split from the operations side of the business and forging a new regulatory group was the challenge of changing our behaviour. We no longer drafted completed regulatory documents and handed them out there. We learnt we had to work through our central frameworks and processes team, and externally we needed to involve and educate our stakeholders. For a while some of them still said, we want prescriptive regulation, just tell us how to do it and we'll do it. But we knew we needed the engagement and support of that regulated community. So we adopted the expert committee process, and it gave us a formal and facilitated way to tap into the knowledge and expertise of our practitioners. So we ran workshops and communicated by email to debate and resolve the content of new standards. We found they gave their time and resources willingly to assist what they would know would be a better product from having the benefit of their involvement. Expert committees meant a shared responsibility with the regulated communities in our expert committee process for developing the delivered outcome. Once the expert committee process is finalised and approved draft standard, we moved to the public consultation phase. And a senior policeman who embarked on a new internet-based public consultation round on their new Summary Offences Act to describe the feedback from many former targets of regulation as unhelpful. They must have introduced computers into the prison. We also use our website and email distribution list to go as wide as possible to seek feedback. For example, when reviewing South Island high country leased properties, some of that amazing scenery we saw earlier, we seek and receive feedback from NGOs like Forest and Bird, Fish and Game, and public access groups. And unlike the policeman, we found a wealth of good feedback. An academic discovered a flaw in a very long and convoluted geodetic scientific formula. The banking sector and police provided invaluable advice for identity theft for a standard on transacting land, where we're trying to minimise the risk of fraudulent property transfers. If required by law, we advertise in public newspapers, but we found our best source of feedback is from the internet, where we can use that and email tools to involve as many people as possible. Just turning to the results of the LINZ approach to developing regulatory standards, they've been overwhelmingly positive. The regulated communities we work with have taken part in developing our new documents. They've given very positive feedback about the process, particularly the committee meetings where experts have provided significant input to make effective standards that are then accepted by the regulated community. The documents produced meet our quality criteria, and we've had that assessed by external consultants who have confirmed that the new documents are sound and now fit for purpose. The number of documents we've reduced dramatically from that 300 to 55, and we now know why we intervene with a strong supporting rationale based on risk assessment. We found working through the process was very hard work. It took much longer than we planned, and a huge amount of energy, drive and resilience. Malcolm Sparrow, who you might know from the ANZSOG regulatory program, commented on the completion of our program that most agencies would have given up a long time before then. So we now have a consistent approach to regulation across the regulatory group and buy-in from the rest of the organisation and our external partners. Just turning to my conclusion, The lessons we learnt from the process include planning is vital. Nothing happens without getting the right building blocks in place first. We needed realistic timeframes and management buy-in. We needed internal agreement before moving to the external regulated community. We needed to be flexible and innovative as we went along. We needed a champion at senior management level to support and maintain momentum throughout the process. And we found we had to adhere to good process and be prepared to defend it. The expert committee and public consultation phases take quite significant phases of time and resources, and many times people wanted to cut that to save time. Now that government is challenging all New Zealand agencies to have better and less regulation in New Zealand, we're very pleased to be at the other side with a clear sense of direction, a much better set of traffic lights about how we can do it. And we're not going to go to discussion, we're going to go to the service delivery. Thank you.